In this video, I'm going to show you guys 7 of my favorite terrain builders of all time. Hey guys, welcome back to Eric's Hobby Workshop. In this video, I want to show you guys some of the terrain builders that have really influenced me and the content I create on this channel. Now this list will not feature guys like Neil from Real Terrain Hobbies, or Trent from Miscast Terrain, or Jeremy from Black Magic Craft, or any of these guys that already have a real established YouTube presence already. I want to draw some attention to some of these guys that you might not have heard of, but should definitely check out. So without further ado, let's get to it. First up, Soul Vince. This guy creates some of the coolest and most realistic industrial terrain I've ever seen. Through a combination of kit bashing the familiar GW kits in a way that remixes them to create something fresh and new, as well as adding styrene pieces like pipes and little girders and I-beams and little bits of chain, he creates really deep, extremely detailed settings that are absolutely mind-blowing. He's been working on a set of tiles for, I guess, an underhive sort of setting, and it's absolutely amazing. He's also a master of weathering, from doing grimy little corner bits to some of the most fantastic rust that I've ever seen, and his stuff is definitely worth checking out. By the way, I'll be posting links to everybody I mentioned in this list down in the description, so make sure to check them out after the video and go give these guys a follow on their various platforms. Next up is Dented Armor. This guy makes some of the most amazing fantasy buildings. He has a really distinctive style that's super crisp that I really love. He makes buildings that just sort of seem like they're right out of my imagination. They have some exaggerated elements like cartoonishly long chimneys and very pointy gables on them that really give this distinctive high fantasy look that I absolutely love. He also is a master of this really crisp paint job he puts on everything, which I assume uses an airbrush, that gives everything sort of a surreal, cel-shaded look that I think is just absolutely fantastic. He's really got a style of his own, and the care that he puts into each one of his builds is fantastic. The way he's able to compose shapes together is something that I really look to for inspiration when I'm working on my own builds. The more shapes you have in a building tends to add to the visual interest and make it more interesting to look at, and he's absolutely nailed that in each one of his builds that I've seen. He also scratch builds all of the details that go onto his piece, like doors, windows, things like that. He's done some little tutorials over on Instagram that you guys should go check out. Next up, Neil 101 NR, or Neil Reed. This guy is absolutely mind-blowing in the stuff he creates. His most recent project in particular is just jaw-dropping. It must be at least 6 feet tall, and it's a ash wastes hive spire type structure that is just, it's literally jaw-dropping. Like when you see this thing, it's one of the most amazing pieces of terrain that I think anyone will ever make. It's composed of plumbing fixtures and I don't know how many GW kits in a way that is quite frankly masterful in its composition and its structure, and then it's given a fantastic paint job and weathered immaculately as well. And there's even detail inside, which is one of my favorite parts. It seems to be able to be deconstructed and played inside. And Neil has this really cool technique where he uses those normally annoying strings from the glue gun and he sort of strings them across corridors in a way that looks like some sort of futuristic dystopian spider web, or it just adds so much visual interest and detail, and it's a really cool technique. I've never had any feelings except for utter loathing for those glue strings until this guy. But it's nothing new for Neil to be a pioneer. His name on Instagram, Neil101, apparently comes from, he's been into the hobby since White Dwarf 101, and he's extremely prolific in the amount of fantastic terrain projects he's created over the years. One of them that I find particularly cool is something that's called the Ark, which is a massive Space Hulk type board that he did, and it's hard to overstate how ahead of his time Neil was in terms of the aesthetic that he put into this board. This is before Citadel released any of their texture paints like the crackle paints or any of those technical paints that produce a rusty finish, and he weathered this board just to the nines, and it just looks just caked in grime and absolutely disgusting, and it's super inspirational and one of the coolest boards I've ever seen, so he definitely deserves a mention on this list. Next up is Marin Sopa, or MS Terrain Labs. Marin might be the foremost Mordheim guy in the world in terms of terrain creation. He has a vision of the City of the Damned that is unparalleled in my opinion. In addition to having a great sense of what makes a building playable and what makes a board aesthetically pleasing as a whole, he also has a super keen eye for really cool details. In specific, I really admire his one technique where he suggests the construction of the buildings as a lath and plaster, where when the buildings are broken, you can see these broken boards coming out of the edges, and then you can see this crackling plaster texture on top. And I think he actually goes into depth about how he does this technique in 28 magazine, and I've yet to try the technique for myself yet, but it's using an air dry clay, and I just find it super impressive. And maybe I'll try it on this channel someday. Most recently, he's done a board that has a sewer tile system, so he's taken all these really cool pictures and posting them recently of these amazing resin pours with broken down old docks and crumbling stonework pouring into the water, and then these looming ruined structures in the background with sort of a sunsetty sky, and it's just like fantastic stuff. His photography work really does his pieces justice as well, so I definitely recommend you go check him out. Next up is Dylan Gould, or 40K Ham Slams. Dylan is on this list for a couple things. First of all, his absolute mastery of the understanding of the Necromunda setting, in my opinion. If you don't know much about Necromunda, it takes place in a vast hive city where, if you can imagine Manhattan stacked up into the sky to the point where the top of the spire is in space, and the elites of Necromunda look out into a starscape where ships are docking below them on the spire. Contrastingly, the downhivers, the underhivers, everybody who lives below lives in this teeming metropolis where structures are piled on top of each other over thousands of years, and there's urban decay and industrial pieces and massive ducts and vents and crisscrossing gantries, and it's one of the coolest things that just gets my imagination going every time. And Dylan has done a fantastic job of suggesting this in my mind with the epic scale of some of the things he builds. He's built a vertical board that must be 6 or 7 stories high. Starting at the bottom with some of the Dark Uprising walls from the most recent Necromunda box set, and then towards the top he's transitioned into making custom cut styrene card pieces in the same style. And then here's the mind-blowing part. He riveted the whole thing with tens of thousands of rivets by hand, which is a level of patience and dedication that I can only aspire to. He is a little bit different from the other people on this list in that he does have a YouTube channel. He just recently started one, and he shows some of his weathering techniques, which are really awesome on there, so go check him out. I'll link him down below. Next up is one that I actually need your guys' help with tracking down, and this is a fellow who went by the name of Wolfgang. About 5 or 6 years ago, I used to go on this website called Gideon Gelande, and on it they had these tutorials that were just pictures with Comic Sans font typed on them and showing the most amazing XPS foam builds, from castles to Mordheim stuff to everything in between. He built several castles that were, each one of them was a masterpiece in of its own. The website Gideon Gelande is now down, it's gone. It's not archived. I've tried the Wayback Machine, and I've asked in a few groups if anybody knows who this guy is or where his stuff can be found, and I haven't come up with anything. I only have a very few pictures to show you guys, and one of them is here is his Vampirburg, which is a vampire castle. And there used to be a lot more pictures of this, and it was super cool. There was a whole crypt portion in the bottom where there was a sleeping Nosferatu looking vampire, and he'd carved out this vaulted ceiling, and it's still to this day some of the best foam carving work I've ever seen. It's one of the things that got me really inspired to build terrain again after several years off at the time, and I just can't find the guy. I don't know where he is. If anybody knows him, if anybody's watching this that knows where I could find some of his pictures, please let me know down in the comments. I'll pin your comment. I want to see more of this guy's stuff again. I miss it. I really wish I'd saved all the pictures when I had the chance, you know? But hindsight is 20/20. But please, if anybody knows Wolfgang, who used to post on Gideon Gelanda with these distinctive Comic Sans pictures, please let me know down in the comments. I want to take a moment to thank all my patrons for their continued support, especially my Mastercrafter patrons, Robert Reichel, Joseph Hobbs, Thomas Murray, Paypig69, and Lyander, as well as my newest set of patrons, OIT, The Wild Dice Podcast, Kiwi Skis, and Indoscopia. Your guys' support, I really appreciate the heck out of you guys. I wouldn't be able to do what I do here without you guys, so thanks very much. If you want to join my Patreon, click the link below. We've got a Discord server, we've got lots of cool behind the scenes content and extra features, so check us out. Thanks guys. Next up is Will Cooper, or Slave to the Whip. Will is one of the most talented Necromunda terrain builders I've ever seen. If you've ever had any doubts about the capabilities of MDF kits, go look at Will Cooper's stuff, because this stuff is absolutely mind-blowing what he does with some of these kits. Through a highly technical paint job, adding some bits, adding some lighting, adding some printed out signs and things like that, he's able to transform these things into some of the most deep and detailed and fantastic structures that I've ever seen inside the hobby. Most recently, if you know Necromunda, you know there's a scenario in the first box set with a toll bridge crossing, and he recently built this fantastic bridge board with the Sump River running underneath it and a crashed Thunderhawk in it, and the whole thing is just detailed to the nines. He's another guy who is an absolute expert at weathering, and he has some tutorials on his blog that you can go check out. In particular, I really like the way he's done the water on this. It reminds me of like Morning Glory Pool at Yellowstone or something. It's just so gorgeous, and his stuff really inspires me, so he definitely gets a place on this list. Last up is Josh from Dakatastic. Josh is one of those guys who has pieces that make me feel bad about myself when I see them, because they're so good, you know? They're so immersive and fantastic that sometimes you feel like you're looking at a piece of concept art or something when you look at them. In particular, he did a Titan base that's sort of, he's walking on this crumbling ruin where all these pipes and conduits are sticking out, and there must be 1,000 pipes in there, because it's so rich in detail and so well executed that it looks real. I mean, isn't that what we all want to do, is capture a slice of the imagination and make it real? More recently, he started working on a project called the Halo Stars, which, to be honest, I don't really understand what it is. I think it's some sort of 40K world type thing that he's doing with his friends. But the upshot is that he's making these really cool fantasy type buildings with a few futuristic elements, and it kind of combines my two love of grimdark future dystopian stuff with medieval European stuff in the same thing. So I'm keenly following it, and he just, you know, is showing his talent in his ability to compose roof lines and add a whole ton of interest and shapes to a structure, and it's really cool and really inspiring stuff. So there you have it, guys. 7 of my favorite terrain creators of all time. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this video, and if there are any glaring omissions of fantastic terrain creators, I always want to hear about them. I should say this list is by no means necessarily complete. There are tons of others that have inspired me over the years and continue to do so, and maybe I'll get to them in a future video if you guys like this one. As usual, if you guys like this kind of content and want to support my channel, there's a link to my Patreon down below. Normally this channel focuses on scratch builds, and we'll get back to that next week, but I wanted to change it up this week, so let me know what you guys think of that in general. As usual, please like, comment, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.